Traitors must die!
Hello, friends. Let's talk about Robotech for a little bit. Robotech was one of the first big anime I ever watched as a kid. It was this and Cowboy Bebop that got me into anime in the first place. So I figured let's take a look at this series from the 80s and see how well it holds up. And turns out a lot better than you would imagine, really. In the year 1999, a space fortress crashes into an island in the middle of the ocean. Revealed to be from an advanced alien civilization, the forces of Earth realize that maybe waging World War when there's a possible imminent alien invasion is a really bad idea. So they decide to form a cohesive Earth government and start trying to rebuild the space fortress in order to understand the technology that it was involved in making it. Over that time, an army base and a civilian city was built up around the space fortress, later being named Macross City. And in the year 2009, the Space Fortress is ready for its maiden voyage. Under the command of Captain Global and his magnificent mustache, and his second-in-command, Lisa Hayes. Unfortunately, there seems to be no rest for the wicked as she has to guide in a young hotshot flyboy from an air circus named Rick Hunter. Rick Hunter looked at Maverick from Top Gun and said, "Hold my beer," as he interrupts a speech being given by his big brother about the marvels of new robotechnology, and decides to put his own life at risk along with two other pilots by flying in between a complicated aerial maneuver. Fortunately, nobody's killed, but yeah, Rick, you're gonna get a lot of people killed over the course of this show, I can tell already. Rick's brother Roy Fokker comes over at him and proceeds to tell him what a complete and utter dumbass he is for even pulling a stunt like that. Rick bribes his brother with the finest fake cola that you can find to try and get out of actually getting shot by him for that little stunt. And we learn that Rick is definitely not a fan of the military, questioning why his brother even joined the military in the first place rather than going into the flying circus with him. Yeah, one interesting thing about Robotech is, for all that it is ostensibly a war story, its message is surprisingly anti-war. We find out in this alternate in 2009 that vending machines are not held to the same standards as YouTubers, since the vending machine decides to try and directly market to some kid throwing a temper tantrum about not getting a soda. Meanwhile, in space, we get the introduction of our villains, the Zentradi, an alien race with a bunch of spaceships that I gotta say I really like the design of, even if they look a little bit like space cucumbers. The leader of this vast armada is Commander Britai. This entire fleet has been sent to try and find the space battle fortress that crashed into Earth all those years ago, so they set about investigating for it. Meanwhile, not holding a grudge, Roy Fokker decides to show Rick Hunter one of the new Robotech jets. However, it's about that point that the battle fortress ends up arming its main gun, despite everyone's attempt to shut it down, and ends up firing at one of the Zentradi spaceships sent to look for the battle fortress, kind of conclusively telling them exactly where to find them. Having found what they're looking for, Britai decides to move in an attempt to take control over the battle fortress from the planet's inhabitants. So the battle computers aboard the battle fortress inform everybody that, yeah, it not only detected something, but it decided to shoot at it. Global realizes whoever sent this fortress to Earth must have installed a booby trap to prevent it from ever being found again or falling into the wrong hands. Hence where our episode title comes from. Realizing the aliens that built the battle fortress have found it, they proceed to scramble all their fighters to try and fend off the obviously impending invasion. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to go well, as the space-based forces of Earth's government get shredded by the oncoming Zentradi invasion, and even Britai and his second-in-command are baffled by how pathetic Earth's weapons seem to be. They're not even using energy-based weaponry! With the failure of their attempt to fend off the Zentradi invasion from space, Roy Fokker and his Robotech pilots move out in an attempt to defend the battle fortress from the invasion. Rick Hunter, being Rick Hunter, has managed to sleep through all of this inside one of the Robotech jets, until Lisa Hayes mistakes him for one of the pilots of the new Robotech wing and orders him to take to the sky. Rick, being the incomparable idiot that he is, decides to go ahead and do this even though he's not a fighter pilot. Which goes about as well as you can assume for somebody who's never flown combat before. Unsurprisingly, Rick ends up spiraling out of control trying to avoid being shot at, and with the prompting of Lisa decides to pull one of the random controls on his dashboard, causing his jet to transform into a giant mecha suit. Yeah, this is definitely an anime.
You are commanded to stay tuned for the return of Robotech.
As young Rick ponders what to do next, the Zentradi invaders draw ever closer. And aboard the reconstructed battle fortress, Captain Global and his inexperienced crew prepare to confront the vastly superior forces of the alien enemy.
Thank you, helpful narrator guy. We can see that the Zentradi are definitely not slouches when it comes to military strategy. Their scout ship took SDF-1, or the battle fortress's radar, offline by using all the power from its main gun to blow it up, allowing them to get the drop on them and get fairly close. They've also landed several small scout ships nearby. Meanwhile, over with Rick Hunter, it seems that he's managed to land right out in front of the Chinese restaurant of Lin Min Mei, and her idiot brother who we saw previously, who instead of just playing in traffic decides to run by the giant robot that he's never seen before. Yeah, great survival instincts there, kid. Meanwhile, SDF-1 sends out some scout helicopters to try and find the Zentradi landing craft that have landed in the ocean. Unfortunately, that doesn't go well for them and they end up getting shot down. Back over at SDF-1, one of the senators responsible for the project ends up telling Global he's under orders to take off and try and defend the city with the space fortress. Though they don't actually know how most of the technology works, he seems more concerned about having the million-dollar project blown up on the ground without ever taking to the sky. Bureaucrats, am I right? Meanwhile, over with Rick, it seems that he's caused more property damage than the invading alien race, and that bump to his head has left him a little bit disorientated. But with the encouragement of Min Mei, he decides to try and see if he can make the giant robot he's now piloting get out of the middle of the street. Unfortunately, he causes even more property damage by slamming into Min Mei's house. So, mild spoilers, friends. Rick is supposed to be one of the central protagonists of this show. Not off to a great start somehow. Back over at SDF-1, they're going to attempt to try and fire up the ship's anti-gravity system to get off the ground. And that does seem to be working at first, but unfortunately somebody didn't tie the anti-gravity units down appropriately, and they proceed to tear themselves out of the battle fortress. On the one hand, this does mean that they're working as advertised. On the other hand, it means that the battle fortress ends up crashing back to the ground below. So much for our understanding of advanced alien technology, I guess. Fortunately, nobody's hurt, so they proceed to try and come up with a different plan. Meanwhile, Roy Folker's battle squadron are returning from having driven off the first wave of enemy assault. And we get a cute bit here of his girlfriend and him.
Very commendable work,
Let
Commander
me
Folker.
talk to him. How many did you shoot down?
Only 10 this time.
You're slipping, Roy.
Well, don't worry, Claudia. I'll make it up.
Hey, 10 is a fairly reasonable number. I don't think it's out of the question to say that 10 is above average, even. Oh, you were talking about enemy combatants. Never mind. Anyway, Roy finds out from Claudia what happened to Rick and informs her of his civilian status before going to retrieve him and his giant robot.
I should have known better than to leave him alone.
See, I like Roy. Can we just have him be the main character instead of Rick Hunter? Even Roy realizes Rick is irredeemable at this point. At any rate, Roy comes in to try and help Rick figure out how to use his giant robot suit. While fixing up Rick Hunter's giant robot suit, we find out they're called Battloids, and this is the famous Robotech we've heard all about. The modular modes that allow them to transform between the jet mode, the regular walker mode like this, and the half-jet, half-walker mode. We also get this adorable moment with Min Mei.
Min Mei, come on. Okay, Auntie. See you later. We're being evacuated.
Min Mei, you are way too enthusiastic about being evacuated. At any rate, we get to see the giant walkers of the Zentradi, and I gotta say, for all they look a little silly jumping around like giant rabbits, their weapon distribution allows them to look somewhat intimidating, actually. And once again, we can see the tactical brilliance of the Zentradi. Realizing that they have the high Earth orbit with their giant spaceships, they're going to lay down suppressing fire to obliterate all of the buildings around the giant space fortress to make it easier for them to move in and capture it. Brilliant! Why don't they do this in other sci-fi shows? Oi! Wouldn't that make combat rather easy and utterly destroy any tension that there might otherwise be in major fight scenes? Hey, it's called narrative imperative. Also, how do you people keep sneaking into my recording room? Get out! Back down on the outskirts of the city, Rick points out to Roy that he's still not really sure how to use the top-secret machinery that he's been given, so Roy has him switch over into Guardian mode since that should be easier for him to handle.
The Guardian controls operate almost exactly like the fighter plane. You can fly it without any problem.
Okay, little bit of nerd rage right here. How exactly does a giant robot with arms and legs handle exactly like a fighter plane? I don't get it. Well, somewhere else in the world of not making any sense, Min-Mei has decided that rather than going to the emergency shelter where all the civilians are being evacuated to, she's going to run back to their Chinese restaurant because she left her diary behind. And apparently giant invading aliens might want to read that. And by the way, you realize this is the world of not making any sense because even though the city is being bombarded from space by energy lasers, she is somehow not killed in all the carnage. This is unfair and unkind to reality. Rick and Roy move out to try and meet up with the other Battloid pilots as the Zentradi begin their invasion, and we can see that there's a lot of close quarters fighting in this urban environment. But we are very careful to repeatedly mention all the civilians have been evacuated. Gee, it's almost like Batman vs. Superman could have taken some lessons from an anime from the 80s. By sheer coincidence, Min-Mei is rescued by Rick and Roy, and Rick is charged with trying to protect Min-Mei while Rick draws the enemy fire. And that leads to one of my favorite lines of the entire episode.
I thought you were an amateur! Huh? Oh no!
Trust me, I can do it.
Do I have to?
Again, I kind of just love how everybody realizes that Rick really shouldn't be the main character of this series. While Rick Hunter, fighter pilot extraordinaire, makes good his escape, we get a little bit of dialogue implying that both Rick and Roy have a crush on the presumably maybe 16-year-old girl who they literally met just a few minutes ago. I'm a little worried about these two. In an attempt to avoid being blown up by some rockets, Rick ends up losing one of his arms and has to defy the laws of physics and reality to get Min-Mei in the cockpit with him. You heard me. That's not a double entendre. Why do you ask? Well, everybody seems to be safe for the moment, except for the fact that Rick runs into one of the giant robots and ends up having to try and put him down without knowing exactly what he's doing, revealing what the Zentradi actually look like inside of their giant mech suits. And the fact that they're 50 feet tall. So yeah, either the Zentradi walkers have to be double that size, or they have got Gallifreyan technology allowing them to stuff themselves inside those things. I'm not sure which. Back over at SDF-1, they've recalled all of their fighters and are going to attempt to use the conventional rockets the ship was equipped with to take off and try and get up into high orbit. But yeah, after everything, Rick is a little bit emotionally exhausted and completely shuts down for a bit.
You are commanded to stay tuned for the return of Robotech.
In the third episode of the series, Roy manages to somehow talk himself out of a court-martial for allowing a civilian to gain control of top-secret alien technology that they've been using to fight giant monster aliens. Though that may also be due to the fact that right now the military really has much bigger fish to fry. Meanwhile, Rick has recovered from his little power nap and attempts to try and get back up in the air, only to realize that giant robot is a little handsy and is not letting them get off the ground. Fortunately, Roy comes back and takes possession of Min-Mei and Rick so that they can be taken to somewhere safe, and possibly used as evidence as part of his court-martial hearing. We do get a really good demonstration of what an excellent pilot Roy is, managing to fight his way out of the city even with the two civilians. Yeah, this is not a guy to take lightly. Again, can we please make him the main character? It's not too late! In the interim, SDF-1 has managed to make it up into the upper atmosphere and even into outer space. The plan is for them to meet up with the rest of humanity's space fleet and try and organize some sort of a resistance against the aliens and hey, it seems like clear sailing. Not a sign of Zentradi in sight.
Isn't that strange?
What?
After launching such a massive attack from orbit, why isn't the enemy continuing their attack? It just doesn't make sense, does it?
And even Captain Global seems to feel it's a little concerning that they haven't been shot at just yet. Weird when being shot at's comforting. Meanwhile, Rick's trying to convince Roy to let him take Min-Mei back to the city, even though it's infested with giant robots.
Did she give any reason for wanting to go back?
Well,
Well, I'm worried about my aunt and uncle back in the shelter with the invaders all around them.
Yes, Min-Mei, please go back to the city full of giant robots. What are you gonna do? Punch them? Roy tries to reassure Min-Mei, pointing out that the shelters that everyone's been evacuated to are almost impregnable to anything. Why, they're practically space-worthy.
This is Skull Leader calling SDF-1. Over.
Did you find him?
And once again, it seems that Rick's very presence seems to invite nothing but annoyance in the people around him. Not helped when Rick starts insulting Lisa Hayes.
Plane.
Who's that old sourpuss, Roy?
Old sourpuss?
Yeah, for reasons that completely escape me, Lisa allows them to land aboard the SDF-1. Meanwhile, Britai continues to give orders not to fire upon the battle fortress, since they have strict orders not to damage it in any way possible if they can avoid it. Britai's second-in-command, Exeter, points out that if they get much further out of the atmosphere, they'll be able to execute a hyperspace fold and then disappear beyond the range of their guns. Once again proving there is no justice in this world, it seems Roy rescued Rick's little tiny prop plane and brought it aboard the SDF-1 for safekeeping. However, that's when the call comes down that they're about to meet up with the rest of Earth's space fleet and they need all officers at duty stations.
You two stay here and don't wander around. If you start exploring, you'll get lost. You can't imagine how enormous this ship is, so stay put.
And how long do you want to bet it is before they begin to completely disregard those instructions? 5 minutes? Well, the rendezvous seems to be going smoothly enough until Britai decides to cut the interchange a little short by disintegrating all of the rest of Earth's space fleet.
They're tearing our fleet to shreds. What about our damages?
We've taken no direct hits, Captain.
Dang, I give full credit to the Zentradi gunners. They've got good aim. Both Global and his mustache have had it with the Zentradi just utterly wrecking his day. So the plan is they're going to try and make it look like they're about to land on Macross Island before using the interspatial fold system to teleport behind the moon, giving them some cover. Given how the anti-gravity system worked out, I would feel like this is a risky move, but they really don't have many options at this point. Continuing to act like the idiot that Rick is, he decides to try and get his little prop plane ready to take Min-Mei back to Macross Island, even as SDF-1's intercom tells everyone to stow themselves for a hyperspatial fold. Fortunately, Rick and Min-Mei get caught in the hyperspace space fold as it proceeds to teleport away Macross Island and some of the surrounding ocean. So yeah, all of that stuff instantly freezes in the vacuum of space, not helped by the fact that SDF-1 was not anticipating to teleport away a large landmass along with the surrounding ocean into space, so they end up incidentally colliding with it. As Rick and Min-Mei manage to survive this, though Rick realizes that his little prop plane isn't really designed to fly in space, and that they're leaking oxygen. Fortunately, because it's a stunt plane, he's got a rocket attached that'll allow him to hopefully steer them back to SDF-1. It seems not all of the Zentradi were able to escape once the city was teleported away. However, one of them explodes, giving them an easy way in, even if it does end up damaging Rick's little biplane. Fortunately, they're safe aboard SDF-1 even if they have no idea where they are. Unfortunately, SDF-1 knows exactly where they are. Apparently they mildly overshot, and they're now in orbit of Pluto. Not helped by the fact that the hyperspace fold system just disappeared. Managed to go off to Hawandaland for a lovely vacation. So they are now stranded at Pluto with no backup. And on that depressing sentiment, we round out the episode. So yeah, an interesting start to the Robotech franchise. We get a couple of episodes that give us a good bit of detail about the world so that we're not left completely confused, as well as setting the narrative stakes and giving us some characters to root for, even if I want Rick Hunter to die in a trash fire. These 3 episodes also do a good job of setting up the Zentradi as a credible threat and providing us with the mystery of why it is they want SDF-1 exactly. The mech design for the good guys and the bad guys isn't nothing to write home about, but it's a pretty solid start for the series. Well, that concludes our look at the first 3 episodes of Robotech. What can you expect from the next multi-parter? Well, giant fish heads out of nowhere. This show suddenly transforms into Transformers, and Rick finally grows up. About bloody time. I hope to see you all then, and hey, I hope that you are interested in this show, and if not, at least you learned something. Until next time, friends, see ya!
Glory to the Zentradi! My name is Commander Britai, and if you wish to show your support for this series, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to Dyslexic Cosplayer. Also consider checking out his Patreon. Though our culture does not understand the idea of art or creativity, we find it most fascinating. All requisite tactical links will be found in the description below.